We'll start a new series next week. All right, let's close that and that, open that and that. All right, so take your Bibles, Daniel chapter 1, verse number 8. Most of us know the story of Daniel, so I'm not going to belabor it, but we're going to talk about your faith and your values and why they matter, and ultimately in your success. For one thing, your faith and your values will determine what success looks like for you in life, in your faith, and so if you once you come to terms with where you stand on those things, then it's much easier to determine where you're at along this path or this journey, and the distance you still need to cover, what you need to do to accomplish those things. So the decision to base life on convictions and not convenience is really what this thing comes down to. That is what Daniel does when Daniel chapter 1 and verse number 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Daniel made a choice to base his life on his convictions and not on the convenience. And your purpose in life will be preserved by your convictions. And so your purpose is protected by your convictions. Ultimately, whether you reach your purpose in life or not is going to be determined by where you stand with your convictions, whether you hold to your convictions or whether you just kind of let it go. And so we live in a world that is constantly pressuring people to trade their convictions for convenience. And the world will tell you, just get over yourself. You're not so important. You're not the king of the world, right? So, and the way that the world tries to keep you in line, for the most part, tends to be by telling you that anytime that you bring up that you have a conviction about something, they'll tell you that you're stuffing something down their throat, right? You're just trying to stuff that down my throat. You're just trying to stuff your Christianity down my throat. You're trying to stuff your values down my throat. And the reality is, I'm not stuffing anything down anybody's throat. Right? Where I stand is where I stand. But if you're going to try and swallow me whole, then, right, that's what's going to happen. Right? You're going to get my convictions. And so values are, in this world, are treated as though they are flexible. They can change at any point in time. They are situational. And so as the situation changes, so do people's values. And they're optional. You don't even have to have any values. The world will convince you that you can be successful in life and you don't have to have any values. That's not accurate. You're going to have to determine what your values are. You're going to have to determine what your values are, where you stand morally, where your convictions are at if you're going to be successful in life. If you don't determine those things, then you're a success right now. There's nothing further to be done. What do you have to work towards? You've already accomplished it all because you have no convictions, you have no values, you have no future mindset, you have nothing to look forward to, you have no goals in mind. So you are where you're going to make it. Which is why the world kills itself. Because if there's no values, there's no convictions in life, then there's no goals to set. And if there's no goals to set, there's nothing to try to reach. And if there's nothing to try to reach, then I have already attained the highest point of being me that there is. And what else is there to do? And so these things really do matter. And they matter. Sometimes we listen to people talk about these things. You may even listen to me over the last few weeks talking about these things and thought to yourself, well, this is all just, self-help kind of mumbo jumbo, yada, yada, yada. But the reality is, if you don't have values, you have no convictions, you have no purpose in life, you are as good as you're going to get. Hope you're happy with it. Right? And so that's the way the world treats most things. What matters most to the world is, does it work? Is it comfortable? Does it keep me out of trouble? That's the way the world that's the way the world determines its values. Which is why, right, I just this last week saw a thing. I don't know who the football player was, but he was on a panel for something. And he said something about when playing Smear the Queer when he was a kid. He issued an apology statement about how insensitive it was and yada, 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 and how he's going to do better. He's not going to do better. He's lying. He doesn't feel the way that he said in his social media post. He feels the way he did when he was on the show, which was he wasn't saying anything about queer people whatsoever. But his values shifted just like that. Why? Because a little bit of discomfort, a little bit of trouble, and it was inconvenient to hold the value. So it shifted just like that, not even a deep value. Right? Listen, if you have no values, you will be easily swayed. You're going to be pushed around all over the world. And so your values are very, very important. Scripture teaches us something very different than the way that the world lays it out. Scripture teaches us this, that your faith and your values anchor you. They are an anchor in difficult circumstances. They do not adjust to difficult circumstances. When the water rises and the storm comes in, it is your faith and your values that hold you in place. They're important. Daniel is proof of that. He's a young man. He's living in a very hostile culture. Right? He is far from his home, where he could have had every excuse to let his values and his faith go. Right? And talk about pressure to conform. I mean, it doesn't get higher pressure to conform. Daniel's not the only one. We're told the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in this, right? In this same era, this same time period. I mean, there was pressure to conform, but Daniel doesn't do it. Right? He had lost everything. He lost his country. He lost his freedom. He lost his way of life. Or did he? If you hold your faith and your values, you never lose your freedom. You never lose your way of life. People may be able to take your geographic country, but they cannot take the country from your heart. And history, by the way, tells us that. Listen to the stories of the POWs. Pastor Johnson used to have Brother Wayne Livesay come in and speak all the time, who was a pilot who was shot down, was a prisoner of war. You couldn't take those guys' country. You couldn't take those guys' freedom. You can put up a wall, but you can't take people's freedom, not if you hold firm to your faith and your values. And so they matter they're very important. Daniel had already settled this matter in his heart, is what the Bible tells us here. He was not reacting to the situation. He was resolved long before the situation ever showed up. Right? And so his convictions are what the convictions that he had formed as a youth, because Daniel's a young man when he goes, the convictions he had already formed as a youth is what protected his purpose from the attacks that would come. And Daniel is constantly under attack, as we know, right? His values are always under attack. Listen, if you'll settle your values ahead of time, then in times when you have to choose obedience over comfort, it won't be so difficult to choose. It's much clearer when the moment of testing arrives if you've already settled where you stand on some things. right? And so Daniel, the Bible tells us here, had purposed in his heart not to defile himself with the king's meat. Daniel wasn't being dramatic, right? Daniel wasn't standing up with his little picket sign, I won't eat meat. That's not what's happening. Daniel's also is not gathering a bunch of guys in the corner and saying, okay, boys, now listen, we're not eating this meat. I don't care what these guys say. Daniel's not doing that either. Daniel's saying, as far as I'm concerned, my values say I can't eat this meat. I can't defile myself in this way. There's a massive difference here. Right? And so he had a quiet, internal discussion, came to a decision, and that decision was final. And you couldn't sway him from that decision. That's the way you want to be. Daniel's resolve is what shaped his entire life. And it will shape yours too. The reality is this: what you settle privately in your life is going to determine how you live in public. And if you decide privately in your life, you come to the determination that all that matters is whether I am accepted by others, then that's how your life will live out publicly. Have you ever been around somebody who they just have a certain, they have a certain way of being? They really don't care what you think or anybody else thinks. That's just the way that they are. And you say, well, I disagree with that, and you'll tell them this, that, and the other, and they'll just say, yeah, I don't care. I'm not changing. And it's kind of annoying. Right? It's a little bit annoying because you think to yourself, like, look, you're ruining it for everybody else. Right? But they've decided that that's not them. They're not doing that. Right? That's the kind of person that Daniel was here. So we learn a couple of different things here from this. Number one is this: conviction. Your convictions is what will protect your calling in life. When you settle your heart, or what you settle, I guess, in your heart, is what is going to guard your future. There's some things to think about with convictions. Number one is this: convictions are internal decisions made before the external pressures arrive. That's what a conviction is. A conviction cannot be decided in the heat of the moment. You have to decide it before the pressure shows up. Brother Dr. Howes used to say all the time, right, that people would ask him, how he made decisions. How do you make all these decisions? You have to make thousands of decisions every day. And he would say, I don't have to make thousands of decisions every day, because those decisions were made before the question arose. My convictions make my decisions. Right? You've got to make some decisions in your life where you're going to stand on some stuff. And those decisions, so you have to start with the end in mind. All right, which means you got to reverse engineer your life. Do you, when people stand up at your funeral, is this what you want them to say about you, right? Well, I'll tell you this. He was easily swayed. You could change his mind about anything. He followed whoever was the last voice he heard. Right? Or do you want, when people stand up at your funeral, say, you know what? He was stubborn. But man, once he latched onto something, you couldn't change him. Right? And so, listen, Daniel, the Bible tells us in the passage, he purposed in his heart. Before he ever faced the temptations, right, his convictions had already been formed in advance. If you'll form your convictions in advance, here's what it's going to do for you. It's going to prevent you from panicking in the moment, which is what a lot of people end up doing. A lot of people end up in the moment trying to make up their mind about what they should do, and they get in a full panic. Listen, I see it with all kinds of stuff, right? I see it with the overreaction of people to different cultural shifts in our country. People will overreact to it and will say, "Well, you know, they're burning this, they're going to burn that down," and right? Well, that depends on where your convictions lie. Let me tell you something. If your convictions are solid, they can burn this country to the ground. It's not going to change you. If America is nothing more than the White House and the House of the Senate and the Congress, if that's what makes up America, then yeah, it can be taken. But if what makes up America is the convictions that you hold in your heart, they can't change America. They can't take America away. And the convictions and the values that we are supposed to stand for as believers existed long before America showed up on the scene, and they'll exist long after America leaves the scene if that's the way that God leads. So you've got to determine where you stand on some things, right? It prevents the panic. It also prevents the confusion. If you've ever been in a situation where you hadn't thought about it before, but now all of a sudden you're faced with making a decision about something, it can be very confusing. Right? Because you're in the moment and you're trying to decide whether you're doing the best thing or whether you're just you're in a reaction, if you're just reacting to something, right? And so it's very confusing. It's very difficult to make a decision in the moment. And sometimes, you know what you do when you make a decision in the moment? You make the wrong one. You have to go back and you got to correct it later. Here's what too many people do. They make the wrong decision in the moment and then they double down when they realize it was the wrong decision. Their ego is so big they can't back out and go, you know what? That was the wrong decision. Right? Looking back over the course of my life, right? I can look at things and go, you know what? The intent was right, and the outcome that I desired was right, but the approach was wrong. Right? I can look back over several different conversations that I've had over the course of my life with people and gone, you know what? The approach was wrong. Right? That it takes maturity to do some of those things. Listen, when pressure comes, you do not rise to the moment. We've got this false narrative that exists within humanity as a whole, I think. But right, when the pressure really is on, then you rise to the moment. Let me tell you something. You don't rise to the moment when the pressure's on. Let me tell you what happens when the pressure's on. You fall back to where your convictions lie when the pressure's on. You fall back to what you've already decided. Here's talk to any guy that's in the that's a special operator, special forces, that kind of stuff. You know what? All of them will tell you. We practice these things. We go through these drills. We do them 100 different ways, 100 different times. We do all of that stuff. You know why? Because when you end up in the firefight, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall back to what you know. There's a reason why KISS has been around, and especially in the military world, KISS has been around for a long time. Keep it simple, stupid. Right? Don't complicate things. Right? It's not the guy that came up with a new way to load his weapon that's going to be the hero in the battle. Listen, convictions are also what create boundaries that will preserve your spiritual clarity. Daniel's convictions drew a very clear line between what he saw as obedience and what he saw as compromise. It was very distinct. Guys that were around Daniel weren't going around going, I wonder where Daniel stands on this. Daniel, it was very clear, right? It was clear to Daniel. Daniel didn't have to ask himself whether he was compromising. You should not, if you find yourself in a situation where you're asking yourself, is this a compromise? It probably is. And listen, I don't think that compromise is always bad. We all do it in our everyday life. You compromise. Right? You're driving down the freeway and somebody moves into your lane without putting on their blinker. Do you hold your ground? I'm just going to let them sideswipe me. That'll teach them. And teach you too, genius. No, you compromise, right? And so compromise is not necessarily a bad thing, but you need to have a clear, distinct line where, hey, you know what? Anything past this line is a step too far. This is compromise that I cannot accept. Right? Those things should be clear and distinct to you. Boundaries, believe it or not, are not restrictions that ruin your life. They are fences, they are walls that guard your real purpose. They guard your success. That's what they are. They're designed to preserve things. And so having clear convictions will eliminate the constant need for an internal debate. You know why some people are so stressed out in our present day and age? Because they don't stand on anything. Believers as well, by the way. If you don't take a clear, distinct stand for some stuff, you're going to be all over the map. You're constantly trying to decide what the right thing to do is, what the wrong thing to do, right? Because you have not already settled some things. He says in Proverbs chapter 4, verse number 23, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. You know what it means to keep your heart? Guard your heart? Put up a boundary? That's what it means. Keep it, protect it. Hold them things back. You have boundary. Listen, if you're sitting in this room, you've got a kid or had a kid, and you love that kid, you set some boundaries, right? In fact, you've given your kids some boundaries that exist even when you're not around, right? People aren't allowed to touch you, right? You don't go anywhere with somebody you don't know, right? You've set some really clear boundaries for your kids. Why? Because you're trying to ruin their life? No, because you're trying to guard them. You're trying to keep them. You're trying to help them make it to where they can live a long and happy life, right? It's the same thing with the convictions in your life. They set boundaries for you. Convictions keep your identity intact, even in a corrupt culture, which is exactly what Daniel's convictions did for him. Daniel's name, his language, his environment, everything around Daniel changed. His location changed. The way he cut his hair changed. The clothes he wore changed. Everything changed. But you know what didn't change for Daniel? His values. His values didn't change. I've been around this thing of Christianity for a long time, right? I have met some people who I wanted to have that haircut, right? Or I wanted to wear what they were wearing. But in a lot of cases, man, they drew a harder line than I drew on some things. I can give you an example, right? I'll give you an example from the evangelical type Christianity, right? There's not one of us sitting in this room right now that would say Catholics have better convictions than we have. But they do when it comes to abortion. I mean, they really do when it comes to abortion. Like, to them, it's not just abortion. It's any type of contraceptive whatsoever. You are standing in the way of God. Like, they take some things a lot more serious than we take them. Right? I'm just saying, listen, it's not the haircut that makes you a good Christian. It's not the clothes that make you a good Christian. It's the values you've determined in your heart. It's the convictions you've decided to take a stand on. Now, some of those convictions may have something to do with the way you cut your hair. Some of those convictions may have something to do with the way that you dress. But it's the values that you hold that make you a good Christian. Right? Listen, when convictions are strong, culture may influence the behavior of people around you, but it will not define who you are, and it certainly won't redefine who you are. That's why Scripture tells us not to be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our minds, right? Because your purpose can survive when your values, when your identity is anchored in your values. Believe it or not, your identity, whether you want to accept this or not, right? I'm not trying to give you a bunch of psychological mumbo jumbo, but your identity is anchored to your values. So if you let your values slip, you let your identity slip, and you become somebody you don't even like looking at in the mirror. Right? I won't ask you to raise your hand, but you ever sinned in a way that you didn't think you'd sin? I mean, went directly against your own personal values? Stepped over a line you know, like that you really don't like to step over, and you don't like it when other people step over it. Then you had to look at yourself in the mirror. And you were like, man, I do not like that person. You know why? Because your identity is tied to your values. And when you let your values slip, it crushes your identity. It mars your identity, and you become somebody you don't even like. That's why your values and your convictions are so important. Because the only way to have a good view of yourself is to have high values and high convictions. And that doesn't mean to have convictions that aren't biblical, right? Which, by the way, go both ways. You can have convictions that are too extreme. They're not biblical. Paul tells you all about it, and the Pharisees were a good picture of it. Right? You can have convictions that are too far. Right? So, listen, convictions don't save you, but they do protect your walk, right? That's why Jesus told the disciples, John chapter 14, verse 21, he that hath my commandments and keepeth them, he it is that loveth me, and he that loveth me shall be loved by my Father, and I will love him and will manifest myself to him, right? Charles Ryrie said, grace does not remove the need for obedience, but it removes the fear from the need for obedience, right? Compromise. Let's talk about compromise real quick. Compromise often looks harmless at first, but rarely is it actually harmless. The king's food in Daniel's case was very attractive, was culturally acceptable, and to them was normal, right? And so it basically presented itself as being convenient and not that big a deal, which is the way that compromise usually takes place, right? But when you begin to compromise, it erodes your spiritual strength over time. The Apostle Paul tells the church in Corinth, wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. Here's how compromise usually shows up. Compromise, well, not usually, but very often compromise shows up like this. You think that you're holding a standard that nobody else holds. You've got a very high standard. And so you think to yourself, you can change your standard a little and still be better than everybody else. And compromise will get you. Listen, compromise is what dulls your spiritual sensitivity. In Hebrews, he says, but exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. Every time that you concede, that you compromise, the next compromise comes easier. When your convictions begin to weaken, your discernment will follow that. And so what once troubled your conscience will become something that you tolerate. Anybody that finds themselves in a position where they commit adultery, it didn't start by just stepping over. They were just standing there, and then the person walked up to them, and they were like, "You're cute," and that was it. And they went and slept together. That's not what happened. Right? The individuals involved in that situation said, well, it's just a smile. It's just a wink. It's just a conversation. Right? And knew that they were stepping over lines that they shouldn't be stepping over. And it felt bad at first, but then it became acceptable. right? Well, or they tolerated it, and then it became acceptable. Then it became normal, and then they told themselves, well, everybody does it. That's how it happens. Listen, it happens that way, whatever your conviction may be, wherever you slipped, that's how it happened. You didn't give up in a day. You started to allow yourself to take liberties with your convictions that you should not have allowed. Your convictions matter. Compromise is what shifts your dependence from God and to yourself. We're told in Proverbs, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, lean not to thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Right? Eating the king's meat was a symbol of relying on Babylon instead of God. And Daniel said, I'm not going to do that. Could Daniel have eaten the meat and not relied on Babylon? Sure. Absolutely. But Daniel looked at it and said, I'm not going to give this kind of a look. I'm not buying into this symbol. You can't buy me for the price of the king's meat. Jesus was sold for 30 shekels, right? Daniel said, you can't buy me. You're not going to purchase me like this. I'm not easily bought off. Have some convictions that aren't easily bought off. Take some stands in your life that aren't easily bought off, right? Because what compromise does is it subtly trains your heart to depend on people, on systems, on comfort. It teaches your heart to depend on just about anything except the Lord. Compromise never improves the purpose. It only delays or damages your purpose. Compromising will never get you to your goal. Right? It's not the way it works. You can't compromise and reach your goal. We all grew up watching cartoons, right? Did the shortcuts in the cartoons, did they ever work out for the individual taking the shortcut? Not one time ever, right? They always ended up coming in last place when they tried to take a shortcut. Compromise is the same way. Compromise looks like a shortcut to getting what you want. But it doesn't arrive in what you want, right? Listen, I give you a lot of examples, but I'll give you a simple one, right? Here's a simple one, right? Most of us sitting in this room, we have a conviction that we should not steal, right? But all of us would like to have more money in our bank account. What looks like it would work, right? Listen, if I just compromise my value about stealing just a little bit, and I convince myself that I'm being Robin Hood, I'm just giving to myself because I'm the poor one in this case, right? And I steal from the rich and give to the poor, me, then I can get what I want, which is, and I'll use it for a good reason. I'm going to do good things with my money. I'm not going to do bad things like the banks do. Right? I'm not going to be a George Soros. I'm going to do good stuff with my money. And so you compromise your values to accomplish what you want. Is it really a shortcut? No. Right? Even if you got away with it, you'd live the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. Right? Listen, compromise never does what you want it to do. Zane Hodges says spiritual decline usually begins not with the denial of truth, but just with the neglect of it. Right? Daniel refused that. Courage is what confirms your faith. Obedience becomes visible through your actions. Right? Courage acts on convictions despite the risk. You can't be courageous if you don't have any good convictions. If you don't have any solid biblical convictions, you're not being courageous. Right? It's one of the things that I think is hilarious in our present day and age, right? You'll get all these people coming out and saying, it's really hard for me to say this. And I'm just being so brave by telling you all that I'm trans. And everybody pats them on the back and says, oh, you're so brave. How is it brave? You're being congratulated for it. You're being lifted up and put on a pedestal. How in the world is that brave? Seems to me like it's the opposite of brave. Seems like it's pandering to me. I'm just giving you my personal observation here. Right? Courage is when you take hard convictions, you take stands that are biblical, that the world doesn't like. And you say, you know what? I'm just going to stand here. Right? I'm not beating you over the head with my conviction. But this is my stand. This is where I stand. Daniel respectfully requested alternate meat. He knew that his refusal had the possibility of ending up badly for him. But he chose to do it anyways. Courage is not the absence of fear, right? We have been told over the course of our lives, but it is taking steps of obedience in the face of your fear. And so faith becomes real when you start to move forward. When your faith becomes real, when your belief turns to behavior, right? Joshua 1:9, have not I commanded thee, be strong and of a good courage, be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee whithersoever thou goest. That's an interesting statement, isn't it? The last part of that verse, for the Lord thy God is with thee whithersoever thou goest. Whether you go to Jericho or not, God's with you. But you're going to be stuck with whatever the consequences of the direction you choose is. Right? And we see the nation of Israel suffer those consequences over the course of the Old Testament. Courage trusts God with the outcome. Daniel did not know what the result would be. He didn't demand a certain type of result. He just trusted God that, listen, God honors obedience. So he chose to trust God with it. In Psalms chapter 37, verse 5, we're told, commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. Courage is what releases you from having to be in control and places all of the outcome into God's hands. That's what courage does. Right? Courage strengthens your witness and your influence. Daniel's stand gains him respect, gains him influence. It's interesting that Daniel wasn't resented for what he stood for. Not by people that had a brain in their head, right? There's certainly some things that happen over the course of Daniel's life where some people resent him, right? But listen, God will often use the quiet courage in your life to open doors for you, for your testimony. But God can't do that if you don't take a stand. How are you going to have a good testimony of taking a courageous stand if you don't take any courageous stands? Right? That just doesn't work that way. The Bible tells you, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works, glorify your Father which is in heaven. Faith lived consistently speaks much louder than faith spoken consistently. There is a lot of content on faith in this world, right? They have some kind of a faith leader on every newscast once a week at least, right? Talking about God, this, that, the other, right? All of that is well and good, and I am for it, right? If the name of Christ is going out, I am for it. But you know what's more powerful than all of that content? You consistently living by faith. That means more to your neighbors than who they saw on TV last night and the words they heard on YouTube. Courage produces peace and not regret. All right, standing firm, taking a firm stand, leaves you with a clear conscience. The world may be chaos around you, but you will have peace inside of you. See, we can achieve what all the Zen and the Buddhists and all of them want to get, which is inner peace. you can have that. You know how to have inner peace? Take a conviction, a biblical conviction, take a stand, and just be consistent with it. You'll have a clear conscience. Whatever may happen around you, you'll have a clear conscience. Daniel didn't have to look back with any shame, he didn't have to rationalize things. His obedience had always cost him something, but compromise he knew would cost him far more. We ought to know that too. So I'll give you just 3 things to think about here, because we're pulling this thing to a close here. But what is the value in your life that recently you can feel like, you know what, like you're getting pressure from the world about this value? You may be getting pressure from other Christians about it, because there's a lot of that goes around too. Right? Realize that your values will influence your patience, your honesty, your forgiveness, your integrity. Right? So your convictions are what guide your relationships and allow trust to grow. Right? Listen, as a church body, well, actually, right, your convictions should shape how you treat other people. So I'll give you an example, right? I have a conviction concerning being able to change your gender. Right? I have a biblical conviction about it. I also have a biblical conviction about being kind-hearted. These 2 things are not oppositional. These 2 things can operate in the same individual. I can be kind and still hold this value, despite what the world says. The world says, no, oh, are you saying that these people don't exist? No, I can see them. They're standing right there. Like, I'm not stupid. Right? I'm also not trying to beat them over the head. I'm just saying, look, you can't change what God made you. I can't change what God made me. You can't change what God made you. And I'm trying to be kind to you by telling you the sooner that you come into alignment with the way that God made you, the happier you're going to be. Right? I can hold both those things. As a church, right, we ought to have shared convictions. You don't have to share every conviction the church holds, but you have to share a majority of the convictions the church holds. If you don't share a majority of the convictions the church holds, why would you be in that church? I share a lot of the convictions that the Catholic Church holds, but I don't share a majority of the convictions that the Catholic Church holds I disagree with. That's why I don't go there. All right? Listen, you ought to lead. If you're a leader in your home, if you're a leader in your company, your business, right? You're a leader in any capacity, you ought to lead with your convictions. You should not lead based on convenience. Right? You can be a good witness at work just by expecting your employees, if you're a manager, to be honest. You don't have to bring in, well, the Bible says this. You don't have to say any of that. All you have to say is, listen, hold yourself to a higher standard, guys. I mean, come on. Right? Be an honest individual. Have some integrity. Right? You can hold a biblical value, right? And people will see that as a biblical value too, by the way. People can associate the fact that you're a Christian, that's why you hold some of these values. People can associate those things. People aren't as dumb as you give them credit for. Right? But we ought to hold to our convictions. All right, you are dismissed. We'll be back in here in about 15 minutes.